Okay, so what I want to just explain in this is more about the different types of columns and the variables that you have access to, and they're automatically populated for you by JDE. So when you go into like some event rules, you're going to see in the event rules that you have business view columns, you have form control columns, form interconnect columns, grid buffer columns, grid columns, and QBE columns. Okay, what I really want to focus on this one is the difference. I'm not going to go into grid buffer. I'm going to go into the difference between grid column, because you're going to use the most, grid column, business view column, form column, and form interconnect. Those are the four I'm going to really focus on right now. So grid column and business view column. Sorry, let me start with business view column. Business view column will work differently depending on the type of form you're in, because this is multiple records. So find browse, header list detail, anything where you're modifying more than one record. The business column refers to the currently loading or the currently updating column. When you're in a fix inspect, there's only one record. So the business column is the currently loading, which is one record, and the currently saving, which is one record. Okay, so JDE manages, and you're going to learn through time because there's no way I'm going to explain this all in a video, but you're going to learn that um, uh, JDE manages those columns for you. So it'll put values into those columns automatically for you. You have control as well to modify those columns, but JDE will automatically have those columns there for you. So for me, oh, okay. So the difference between the columns. So the business columns in here will be managed by JDE. So uh, there's a good document. I don't know if it's on Oracle. I think it's from Oracle that explains when these types of things get initialized. So what happens on this event, okay, before or after, but it also says that grid records are initialized. Business view columns are initialized. It tells you when they initialize these things, okay? So I'll show you right here. When a grid record is fetched, okay, picture this, picture this grid here loading one record at a time, okay? So when I go into here and I click find, what it does is it loads this grid one record at a time, okay? So if when it loads the grid one record at a time, the first thing it calls is grid record is fetched. The second thing it calls is write grid line before. This is for each record. So so for each record, here, for each record it goes grid record is fetched. Write grid line before, write grid line after. Okay, for each record. So there's one record that happens once. Two records, it happens twice. Three records, it happens three times. Okay, this is the events. So right now I had 50 records that were loaded. That event is going to be called, and in this sequence, this one, then this one, to this one, for one record. Fetch, right? Fetched, right? Fetch, right before, after, fetch before, after. Okay. So on this event, your business columns are initialized. That means when I have when I when I use this variable contains data in it. What data? For the first record, it contains BC short item number contains this value. BC unit of measure contains this value. So let me show you here. Grid record is fetched. I'm going to call a business function to just pop up a value. I'm going to pop up the short item number. Okay, so what I did there is I'm using BC short item number. Okay, in this, okay, so let me just do that first. You're going to see it's going to pop up 50 times. What's going on here? Oh, here we go. 271. That's the first call, the first one, right? Click OK. Pops up again, 1,000. Pops up again, 1,001. Each record is loading. Okay, one by one. And it has the value that's in that business view column, right? So now I'm going to close this. Ah, man. Okay. And I'm going to say in the grid record is fetched, I'm going to assign grid column short item number. I can tell you that in this event, that grid column has not yet been initialized. So you're going to see here when this runs a value of nothing. See, 0, 0 everywhere. So what happens, the way that it processed, I just want to get to my point, which was, okay, when a form initializes, and this is where you can look at that documentation, it's got better graphics than me explaining it. But what happens is, first, the grid record gets fetched. The values that are in the data, the actual data values that are in the database get assigned to the BC or the business column variables. So you have access to that data. Then when the right grid line before gets executed, I don't remember if it's this one or this one, but I'm pretty sure it's the first one. Anything in the business column gets moved to the grid column. Okay, and the grid column is what ultimately gets displayed on screen. So let me show you what I could do there. What I could do is, in the grid record is fetched, I can change the value that's going to display on the screen. So this short item number, okay, was different, right? I can say set the grid column for short item number equal to 1. So I don't care what the business column is. Set so here you have a way to change what's going to be displayed on the screen by using business columns and grid columns. Okay, if you don't change every time you have a business view, you're going to have a business column and and an associated grid column all the time. So for this, well, sorry, you can have a business column, and if you add that business column to the grid, right, you're going to have an associated grid column. So I'm going to have a BC for short item number and a grid column for this. Sort of. It's like, sort of. No, not really. Okay, so now when I run this application, It's the business. It's the business view. It's only from the business view. Hang on a second. There we go. It's one. Okay. So that just proves something to me. Grid record is right grid line before. Immediately when this is executed, everything from the business column goes to the grid column. It's at this event that I have access to manipulate to manipulate the grid columns. And this is why it's important to understand the the um, the life cycle of how things what gets triggered when. Because look, if I put that here, it didn't work. Why? Because grid record is fetched, initializes the business columns or the business view columns. Grid right grid line before initializes the grid columns. So if I manipulate a grid column here, immediately after JDE is going to overwrite that with the business column because that's when JDE does it in that event. JDE does it. So if I assign it here a 1, it's just going to get overwritten by whatever's in the business view column right after in the next event, right grid line before. So I need to take this code here and move it here if I want to do this after JDE does it. Because right before this event gets called, JDE initializes the grid columns. Okay, so my point, okay, is that in these rows, what you have to understand is the difference between the data that's coming from your business view is all in a business column, business or BC business view column. Okay, the data that gets displayed on a screen is your grid column. JDE will automatically manage to take the data from the table, put it into a business view column variable at a certain point, which is this point, copy that business view column data to your grid column data if you have it on a grid. Then display it on the grid. So whatever data is in your grid view column at the time it actually renders that row, that's what's going to be displayed on the grid. And that's why what I'm doing here, I'm putting it to a 1, will ignore what's in the business view column and put 1 everywhere. The So that's the difference between business column and grid column. Don't know where she is. Okay, so that what I just explained there was for a fine browse form. Grid column will only exist if you have a grid. So this form has a grid. It's got grid columns, and that's the way JDE will start initializing the data for you. Form columns are like that. That's a form column. That's a grid column. These are grid columns. That's a form column. So if I look over here and I look at this, the form control, it's actually called a form control. I have buyer number available to me to assign data to if I want to. I could plug in values in there, but the data is not all, depending on the type of form, it may or may not be retrieved from the database. For example, if I'm in here right now, this type of form is fetching data on the grid, not on the header. So when I run this, this is gonna be empty. There's gonna be nothing in it. Just do it. Let me do this one here, SRP1. There's gonna be nothing in it.
Yeah, try that.
Right? There's gonna be nothing in it. There's nothing in it. Okay, but if I want to put something in it, I can put something in it. See, there's nothing in it.
Yeah.
Okay, if I want to put something in it, well, this is as easy as saying, okay, when the form initializes,
put the first one.
Take, if you want to put the first one, sure, you could do that. You could do that.
So which one do you want to put?
I'm just gonna put anything in there. I'm just gonna put anything. I'm just gonna hard code it. Put CNG in there. Okay. So it's as easy as that. You just assign the value, and now CNG is in there.
Gotcha.
Okay. Normally on a grid like this,
Yes.
you're not really assigning values to these things unless they're kind of like defaults that you set up, or
it's when you select, it gets transferred. No.
no. Normally a find browse form is these are filters.
Okay.
There's filters. So if you want a default filter,
yeah,
you can put a default filter. Exactly what I did. Default this always to look for the consumer product group. Consumer product group is CNG. So I'm defaulting this to always look at CNG. But normally it's going to be blank.
No, but you have to create. You have to.
You have to code for it. You have to code for it.
As a filter.
That's right. I'd have to. No, I didn't do it. I'd have to do this, filter it. That's it. So now when I run that, right?
Yeah.
Let's say I'm designing this application only.
As a wildcard too.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm looking for only CNG items. But if I do this, I'm looking for all the items, right? And the data changes, right? So I just programmatically set up a default, but I don't have to, okay? The point is that this is a grid column, which is loaded from a business view column. This is a form column. If you look at the fix inspect form, they don't have grid columns, but they have business view columns and they have form control columns. The difference is that this works a little bit differently because this, when I say fetch on form, subform, business view, what it's doing is it's saying fetch the business view data. So when the form is initialized, this data here will come from the data in the table. So now we're working one record at a time, right? The difference between the two is one record at a time for the fix inspect. Find browse is multiple records get loaded.
Gotcha.
Okay, so here I don't have a grid record is fetched or anything like that. So what happens is after the post initialized, okay, happens, JDE will automatically, if you have this set, take the BC and put it to the FC. The FC is the form control. That's exactly what it just did. So when I go over here and run this application, and I double click on this, it's loading this. Hang on a second. I think I have to remove my.
You have to check all of them.
When I double click on this, JDE has that when this thing initialized, it grabbed the data from the database automatically because of that checkbox I had. It put the values right away into the business view columns. it then moved those business view columns into the form controls automatically. I didn't have to code for that. Here, the data that you see here on screen is the value in the FC. Same thing as here. The data I see here is the value in the FC. If I put a value in the FC, that's the value you're going to see on screen. Same thing here. If I put a value in here, that's the data you're going to see on screen. Form control is the form control that you're going to see on screen. Grid control is the grid control you're going to see on screen. So FC and GC are visual. They're actual controls that you're going to visually see. BC are nowhere to be seen. It's just that BC is the data that was fetched from the database. That's what the BC is. JDE will automatically manage transferring BC to FC, BC to GC, depending on the type of form that you're working with and the options that you have available to you. This here, these options, is exactly right here. Fetch on grid business view. That is what's telling JDE to take the data and automatically take whatever's in the BC and move it to the GC. That checkbox there. Okay? So what's important with BC is now I'm gonna have to draw something. Is that like this? You have this is the life cycle of something, okay? So the first thing that happens is the form initializes or loads, right? And upon loading the data, it grabs data from the database. So it puts it into BC. It then renders that information. To render it, it puts it into FC or GC, depending on the type of form. When you're updating, so when you're on a form that does updates, like the fix inspect, it moves it back to a BC. So what's important is the table exists here. So you're selecting or fetching from the table. You're getting data from the table. When you save, so this action here is a save action. It puts data back into a table.
Yeah.
To put the data back into the table, you put it back into the business column. You change the value of the business column.
Okay.
So when you see this here, fix inspect.
Yeah.
There's an event here called update record to DB before. Okay, this is before I've updated this record. I can say I don't care what's here. Okay, in the height, the business view height, put 2. That value, whatever's in that within the BCs, is what's going to get saved to the database. Okay, okay, and I'm updating it before it got saved. If I update it after it gets saved, well, it's too late. It's already been saved. But JDE will automatically say, okay, when I click save here, when I click the OK button, take the form controls, put them into the business view controls. And then upon saving says, what's in my business view controls? Save that data. So you have control in the flow of things to overwrite this. No, I'm just showing you as an example. Normally you wouldn't want to do this, right? but I'm showing you as an example. So if I run this application now, and you see the height here, forget that one. Let's say this one here. The height here is 1.38. If I click on that and I change it to a 5 and I click save, I would expect a 5 there, but what you can see is a 2. because I overwrote the business column right before saving, because it's the business column that gets saved. And JDE manages, again, JDE manages the automatics for you. JDE will automatically take, when you're grabbing data, first load it into the BC, then load it into the FC slash GC. When you save data, take it from the FC slash GC, move it into the BC, and then that's what gets saved. Not sure. Sure. Okay, so that I just wanted to explain the difference between business view columns, which are what the columns that are this is the data that ultimately gets fetched from the database, and the data that actually ultimately gets saved back to the database, versus form control slash grid control columns, which are data that are displayed on screen. Okay, and the automatic behavior that JDE will do, depending on the action you take. So a save will automatically say, okay, take whatever data is in the form controls or in the grid controls, move them automatically to my business view control because you assume that's what you want to do. Give the programmer the ability to manipulate it if necessary, and then take that data that's in the business view columns and ultimately save it. That's the difference between all that. One last type that I want to get into is the form interconnect variables.
Is it different subject?
Completely, yeah, different subject. Can we stop?